Well, we are truly living in extraordinary times. If someone would have asked me, would I be standing up here doing a live stream mass because all of the masses in the Archdiocese of Detroit were canceled, I would have said, well, that's just crazy. I mean, I never would have seen it happen, but I understand why it's happening, and I do have a couple of things to say. First of all, the live stream Mass is meant for people who are home because Mass is canceled. Therefore, if you show up at the doors before the 11:30 Mass as we're taping the Mass, our security team will send you back to your cars. I am delegating all authority from this moment forward to them and my office manager, Pam, so that if anybody comes around at all that's not part of the liturgy or essential to make this Mass happen, they will be sent to their cars. So I'm just telling you now, this is, it's Mass, but you can't come, but you can watch it. That's why we're doing it. That's why we call it live streaming. Now, today's homily. One of the things I've learned, it's a special treat. I only get it maybe 2 or 3 times a year, but it's Oyster's Rockefeller. If you've ever had Oyster's Rockefeller, not many restaurants have it. It's a dish with a béarnaise sauce, oysters, and oftentimes spinach, and it's baked, and it's served in the oyster shell itself, which is kind of cool. You really can't make a meal of it. It's an appetizer, but it's very, very tasty. And I've been thinking through this Lenten season ways in which we can improve our spiritual life. Well, let me submit to you the oyster as an example. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, an oyster is a very simple animal, and when a grain of salt or a grain of sand or something like that gets inside the oyster shell, the oyster realizes that it's a foreign element and might harm itself. So what the oyster does is it immediately begins to take some kind of a lacquer that it develops inside the shell and starts to coat the piece of sand or whatever particle is, tiny stone or whatever it is, and begins to coat it and coat it and coat it as a protection to itself. It begins to fight again. That's its method of fighting and resisting this invasive force. Now, let's take that back and look at this spiritually. What's the invasive force in our life? Well, it's temptation and it's sin. It's temptation and it's sin. And during this Lenten season, more so than in other times of the year, we're reminded that we're called to resist temptation. And we're called to renounce sin. And so, just like the oyster is going after that particle of sand, so we have to build our defenses up against the sins that attack us in our lives. Now, what happens over time as the oyster is resisting that piece of sand? What develops? A pearl, a beautiful pearl. And so it is in our spiritual lives. If we are diligent in receiving the sacraments, if we're diligent in our prayers, if we're diligent in resisting sin and temptation in our life, then inside of our souls, it develops like a pearl, something very beautiful and something that represents our attaining ever closer the kingdom of God.